What I hear consistently from people that I work with is kind of five different themes, and they're habits that we engage in. I'll just call them habits, but they separate us from ourselves and they separate us from our true voice. I call them the five symptoms of disconnection.
The reason why these things matter and why I even take the time to put these topics on my podcast is because you cannot walk in your true identity as a son of God if you are operating out of these behaviors that undermine the true authentic voice God has put inside of you. Because if you think about it, our voice is one of the greatest vehicles we have to establish God's kingdom in the earth. God created the earth with his voice. He made us in his image. And so it's our voice.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenna Lee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this.
Hey friend, quick tip for you today. So you know how I love my coffee, pretty sure you do too, but sometimes it's a little bit of a roller coaster. Like 1 minute I'm buzzing and ready to go, doing all the things. And the next minute I'm crashing, like around 2 o'clock. So enter Magic Mind. This little green bottle is like coffee's smarter, calmer cousin. It keeps you focused and energized all day, without the jitters or the crash. It's amazing. So there's 3 ways that it does this. They use matcha, adaptogens, and nootropics. Matcha keeps your energy steady, Freddy, all day long. The adaptogens helps lower your stress. So you know how like coffee can kind of raise your anxiety levels? You won't get that with this. And then the nootropics literally feed your brain, making you probably smarter, but if nothing else, more focused all day long. It's amazing, and it gets better with time. So not only all that, it's really convenient to order it. You can put it on subscription, so it just shows up at your door every month, and the subscription gets 48% off. Holla! And then if you want to use my code, let's say you don't quite want to do subscription, you just want to try it out, use my code and you can save 20% off. So there's literally no risk here. You get a great deal and you're going to find something that you fall in love with. So if you're totally ready to level up your day, your focus, and your energy without the coffee drama, grab you some Magic Mind. Go to magicmind.com/JavaWithJen20. That's magicmind.com/JavaWithJen20 and use my code JavaWithJen20 for 20% off. So whether it's your first time or a subscription, you're going to have a great time. Happy sipping.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me here for another episode at Java with Jen. I have a guest with me, Miss Taryn Marshena, and she is an expert in the things of the heart, the mind, getting whole, getting healthy, and I'm going to let her explain more of what she does. But I want to invite you into this conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about how to discover if you're actually disconnected from yourself and how to get connected again. It's another way of saying maybe if you've lost your voice, and especially in like communicating your feelings and your needs, how to get back in touch with what your needs are, the value of your voice. And some of that happens through childhood, how we're raised. Some of that happens through trauma. Some of that just happens through the way we process. We learned to process things and not realizing that by shutting down our feelings, our voice, and our thoughts, you get disconnected from who God has made you and who you're meant to show up as in your full power. And so I wanted to talk about this because you guys, you are mostly women, but you beautiful men that are hanging in for the ride, your voice matters and your feelings matter and your thoughts matter. And that is all a part of how God made you. So this is part of coming in to who he's made us. So Taryn, with all of that said, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jen. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So Taryn, for those of you guys who don't know, Taryn is a community activator, teacher, an elder at her church, and a business owner. She reconnects you to trust after trauma, that's a big deal right there, guiding you to find your anchor so you can live from who you want to be. Last year, she worked with over 115 clients one-on-one as they broke away from the lies of their past and rediscovered safety. kayaking on a Colorado lake at sunset, and narrating her opinions as she watches Survivor with her daughter and husband are two of her favorite pastimes. She loves Jesus, spicy Cheez-Its, and vanilla lattes in that order. That's great.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you got a little spice, and I'm excited to find out more. Okay, so why don't you tell us how did I introduce the idea a little bit? You'll probably be able to introduce it way better because it's your lane of genius. But tell us how this ended up on your radar. Like, how did you even figure out that it's a thing for people to be disconnected from themselves, and that's actually a very common experience? How did you figure that out?
Yeah, Jen, I personally have lived experience in broken trust and betrayal and trauma and grappling with faith and forgiveness, that whole journey. But I was really blind to the impact that my past had on my present until only about 4 years ago. So I remember being unable to make eye contact as I stared at a shag rug on the floor of this cozy office I was in. And I uttered the words to my brand new therapist: I don't know what to say when someone asks me how I am. And as a perfectionist, I was dying inside, even thinking about how embarrassing it was that I couldn't solve this on my own. It felt ridiculous, shameful, actually. I just remember thinking, yeah, people have real problems. And here I am just confused, wasting this person's time with my non-problems. But it was more than that. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I wasn't sure that I really ever did. And the authenticity of who I was, it had just gotten deeply buried beneath years of hustling and hiding from my trauma. But the hiding, it wasn't conscious. The Lord, we know He brings it up in His timing. But once I started talking about the things from my past that I thought, oh, that's just normal, I couldn't unsee how disconnected to myself I had really become.
Wow.
And I desperately wanted to just rush past the hard stuff and learn the lessons that I needed to and be healed. But time does not heal all wounds. And neglected pain, it just colors the way that I saw myself and others, and God in particular. So this God-designed path to freedom, it would look nothing how 0% how I wanted it to. And it uprooted everything that I ever clung to for security, put me on constant search for safety that I felt like I couldn't ever grasp. But little did I know that a confused, spewed out sentence in a therapist's office was just the beginning of a journey where I would come out of hiding from my past and rediscover myself and reconnect.
Wow, that's so good. Okay, so question. I know a lot of people, and I know this was me for a long time. I don't think I really experienced what I would call a lot of trauma until I was married, let's be honest. And so for me, though, like if I had heard someone talking about this, I would have been like, no, I was raised in a good family and I love the Lord and my life has been good. I don't think I have a lot of trauma. But looking back, I can still see that even before I was married, there were ways in which that I was probably out of touch with myself. And I think some of it was parts of my Christian upbringing that were just misappropriated principles, and just maybe some of it, like, be nice and don't say things that'll hurt, which of course we want to be kind people. But I think some of the things that we're taught maybe nurture and cultivate some of this low key disconnection with who we truly are, our true voice, where we live on the inside, all this stuff happening on the inside. So what would you say to someone who says, I don't think I have any major trauma? Is this something that's still relevant? And how can they identify, maybe what are some red flags that would tell them, oh, maybe this is what I'm dealing with?
Yeah. Well, it's nurture, it's nature, it's trauma. You're right. It comes from lots of different directions. So to be able to find ourselves in it and say, is that me? That's essentially the work that I do. It came from my own journey. And what I hear consistently from people that I work with is kind of 5 different themes. And they're habits that we engage in. I'll just call them habits. But they separate us from ourselves and they separate us from our true voice. They're also habits that we think are just going to keep us most secure short term. So this means that your past need for security probably at some point wasn't met in the way that you needed it to. And that unmet need is just kind of carried into the present. I call them the 5 symptoms of disconnection. So I'll kind of introduce them and give a little example so that people can say, is that me? Do I do that thing? But the 5 symptoms of disconnection are overthinking and pleasing, like you said, always being nice, perfectionism, limited emotional regulation, and then codependency tendencies. And they're just that. They're just habits and tendencies that we fall into. But overthinking, well, I will preface this by saying I do all of them. And it is something that I am constantly navigating, constantly learning to be kinder to myself in some of these things. But I do all of them. So if you find yourself in all of them, yeah, that's okay. But the first one is overthinking. So maybe your mind struggles to just shut off. And it begs you to keep thinking until you come up with the perfect fail-proof plan. You spend lots of time analyzing your feelings, and even if those feelings are bad, and you replay conversations in your head, and indecisiveness is probably your Achilles heel. But what makes it disconnect from yourself is you deny your intuition and you rely on your mind to keep you from stumbling into risk.
Yeah, the second symptom of disconnection is what you were talking about, kind of that constant nicety, the pleasing, but you put value on other people's opinions over your own. So it's really hard to know what you want to do separate from what you think someone else wants you to do. You often play down your emotions. No big deal. You want to seem fine. You want to seem go with the flow. This disconnects you from yourself because you're playing it small and you're shrinking yourself to keep someone else happy. And there's a belief that I don't really matter and that my needs don't really matter. And maybe I don't have needs. Number 3 is limited emotional regulation, which I'll explain that because those are a bunch of jargon words. But essentially, emotions are sticking points instead of something that you feel comfortable navigating with compassion and wisdom. So self-doubt usually becomes the loudest voice with this one. And if that's you, it might be hard for you to slow down and relax. You're really locked into a mode where everything feels overwhelming and urgent, or you might procrastinate it a lot, as in like multiple times a day. And your emotions, they're feeding this constant lie. Instead of being able to separate truth from lie, you believe everything that you think. The 4th one is just perfectionism. So you believe I have to do absolutely everything myself. I cannot rely on others. You strive to do things just right, and there's no room for mistakes or failure. And people seeing you in a particular light is really important. But people with this tendency, what I see the most is that they have really high expectations for themselves, and they are very hard on themselves about them. Rushing healing, especially, is something I see frequently with perfectionism. And the reason it disconnects us from ourselves is in order to stay safe and to not be seen as a fraud or not be seen as not enough, you're less of who you are. So perfection equals safety. And the 5th one is just codependency. So you find security in being really closely attached to one person, and how you feel is how they feel. And this also shows up if someone relying on you consistently gives you that feeling that you're valuable. You can't give yourself a lot of that validation. It's hard for you to separate how you feel from how you think someone feels about you. And you probably have a gift of picking up on really small cues that someone's unhappy with you and trying to change your behavior so they change their mind. What points this one to disconnection is just the separating yourself from that person. It would mean that you had a complete loss of identity. So you're only okay I'm only okay if you're okay with me. But these symptoms of disconnection, really, they just point to clarity. They're supposed to don't hear this and think, oh my gosh, I have so much to work on. They provide clarity on where we turn to for security. And with yourself, they feed the belief that security comes from outside of you, like it's something that you really can't find. But you will spend your whole life trying to find security in small behaviors that undermine your authenticity. So actually, it's undermining your desire of feeling safe altogether. Really just because you're steeped in insecurity and a lack of self-trust long term.
Okay. So I feel like it's a lot, but I feel like some mental pictures will be good. So, but I was thinking about all this, and I'm like, I'm always thinking through the lens of what the listener might be thinking to themselves. And what I can see in this, so stepping back, I feel like trauma, self-care, mental health, all of that stuff is very trendy right now. But it's trendy because I think it is something that the Lord is trying to address in his church, because I think the church has not done a good job cultivating healthy souls. The church has cultivated healthy spirits. Are our spirits really healthy if our souls are unhealthy at the same time? You know what I mean? So I think that's something the Lord is trying to do in bringing his bride to a place of blameless and spotlessness, right? So he's working in the church. But then part of why I think this is also such a powerful thing to look at, and it may sound to the people listening, it may be like, oh my gosh, this sounds like I'm in a therapy session. Yes, you are. You need to be in a therapy session with us. Because I think the reason why these things matter and why I even take the time to put these topics on my podcast is because you cannot walk in your true identity as a son of God if you are operating out of these behaviors that undermine the true authentic voice God has put inside of you. Because if you think about it, our voice is one of the greatest vehicles we have to establish God's kingdom in the earth. God created the earth with his voice. He made us in his image. And so it's our voice, not just our voice, but our truly authentically aligned voice, when our voice actually reflects what's happening inside and it's in a place of truth, right? So kind of like the scripture says in Proverbs that the power of the tongue, or the power of life, is in the tongue, but those who love it will eat of its fruit. And so there's something about when we are walking in truth, like when you love it, in other words, what you're saying, what your tongue is saying is aligned with truth. There's an attachment there. There's a love there for what you're saying because it's true. Then that is what produces life. So our words that are full of disbelief because our heart's actually saying something else, that's what the Bible talks about as being a double-minded man who's unstable in all he does, right? And so I'm trying to pull all of this in because for those who are listening, I don't want you guys to think like, what does this have to do with anything? It has everything to do with everything, you know? And so I was thinking, as you were talking about that last one, I was thinking about when I was in college and I was in Bible school. And when I started to get a revelation that I actually was very uncomfortable with myself, uncomfortable with who I was. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I had a lot of insecurity, and I didn't have any technical reason to feel that way. However, it was still there. And the way I recognized it, that I was new to Bible school, and I remember paying attention to everybody in my department. And the people that got attention or that seemed to attract other people, that people liked them, I would always subconsciously go into this analysis of what was it about them that people liked. And I was like, oh, she's funny. Okay, then I probably need to be more funny. Oh, this person's really chill. I probably need to be more chill. And it was like, I became this like potpourri of all these different people's qualities rather than figuring out who the heck I was, you know? And so as I went on my journey with the Holy Spirit, I started asking him, like, God, show me who I am and teach me to love who I am. And so the Lord actually took me on a journey of, and it started with little moments like when I would make a joke and it fell flat. And instead of inside going into that place of beating myself up, I just stopped and I was like, oh, well, I thought it was funny. The Lord probably thought it was funny, you know, and I would just move on, you know, and that's part of how I knew I was starting to heal, because I was not needing everyone's affirmation or validation. But let's go back now to those 5. Can you give illustrations of them so that people might see how this actually shows up in their life?
Yeah, totally. Well, the overthinking, all of these are on a spectrum, right? They look different and based on your personality, they look different based on your past. But overthinking, I work with clients that say, I'm always in my head. I am constantly, it never ever shuts off. And these are the people that struggle to be really present. So that might be you if you're like, oh yeah, I always have something in the back of my head that's kind of going. Overthinking is essentially just under feeling. So if you also struggle to connect in with your emotions, I like to think of it both as, yes, there's a shadow side to overthinking, but it's also that your mind is a superpower of yours. You go hard on that and you know exactly how to use your mind for powerful purposes. It's just that it's being a little bit overused. Yeah, I think that's overthinking.
That could
And
make
then,
sense because I'm trying to
mhm,
I'm gonna bounce back and forth with you on these. Yesterday, it's funny that you said this. Yesterday, I was coaching a client on her branding, and we were creating the artwork for her podcast, and we landed on a good artwork. Like it was a great design, but she kept wanting to make changes, and I was like, "What? Where are we go? What are you?" And so I finally just told her, I was like, "I think you're getting into overthinking territory. Why don't you sleep on it? Leave it alone. It really looks good. Let's look at it
mhm,
tomorrow, you know?" And she was like, oh yeah, oh yeah. And so I realized that the times in my life, because overthinking can literally torture you. It's a spiral. There's no end to it. And I feel like the times when I've gotten caught up in overthinking, it's because fundamentally I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust my decisions because for whatever reason, I felt like my decisions always needed to be validated by an outside source for me to trust them
mhm.
or something. Can you speak to that a little bit?
That is an underlying theme in all five of these for
Okay.
sure, is yeah, you don't trust yourself at all. And so you're, well, with the example of overthinking, you're just on this cycle of self doubt. It just goes and goes and goes. And you think eventually I'm going to find the perfect solution. But then is it? You just keep going. But there's also with some of the other ones like perfectionism, it's the tie there to not trusting yourself is, do I trust that I will actually be okay if somebody doesn't like me, or if somebody sees right through me, or if somebody recognizes that I'm not perfect? Will I be able to handle the impact of that?
Mm.
So there are different ways of looking at self-trust. That's why some people have all of them, some people have one or two. But yeah, self-trust is absolutely at the center of all of these, or a
Wow.
list of.
Wow. There was one of my sons, my youngest, he showed up on the scene and there was something profound about his indecisiveness. And I remember I would have to have conversations with him. I'd be like, Shiloh, listen, when you make a decision about the toy that you want when we go into the dollar store, you cannot inventory every toy in the store. At some point, you have to go in, see something that you like, choose it, and then trust your decision. Don't second guess
Hmm.
it. Don't think twice because you can spend all day doing that. And so I've literally had to like teach him to trust
Hmm.
his decision making. And then when he wants to change his mind, which he does a lot, tries to change his mind, I have to tell him, no, this is the decision you made. You're going to stand by it come hell or high water. This is the decision you made.
Yes.
And so what are some ways that people can, which I mean, I do want you to give illustrations on the other ones too, but what are some ways
Okay.
that people, when it comes to the overthinking and the perfectionism, what are some things they can do to stop that spiral?
Yeah. So with overthinking, pause, first recognize, okay, I've been thinking, I may be overthinking this. I've been thinking about it for a while now. But with overthinking, it's a lot of compassion, a lot of, oh, okay, yeah, I think I'm just worried that I'm going to make the wrong decision. It's talking to yourself about why you're thinking so hard.
Yeah.
And then you're right. Usually it's coming down to the decision making process. Doesn't matter how big or small the decision is, but in that decision saying, there's no wrong decisions here. Both of them are good. I make good decisions, and finding a phrase that really works for you on a consistent basis. So a lot of my clients like the one of, I'm not going to make a wrong decision here. I know I'm someone who makes good decisions.
Mm.
And just rolling with that every single time your brain's like, but do you? No, I cannot make a wrong decision right now.
Yeah.
Finding it, repeat it, tell it to yourself as a little mantra. And then the second one's pleasing. So again, that recognition of, when do you even start to notice, oh, I'm putting someone before me to a fault? When is that showing up for you? Is there a particular type of people? Is there particular situations? Or sometimes people do with strangers. It's just everybody. I just please with everybody and I make myself really small for everyone. But something with pleasing is to reflect, the power of reflection, to say, why did I feel like I needed to be small then?
Yeah.
Was it keeping me safe from something? Was it whatever? You can go through a million scenarios there. But getting clear on, what is the message that I'm sending myself when I'm pleasing? And what message do I want to be sending myself instead?
Yeah.
And usually it tends to come down to like, I don't matter, or I shouldn't have needs. And being able to counter that directly with something like, no, my voice matters right now. My voice
Yeah.
matters too.
Yeah. It's sometimes, so I'm thinking that people who find themselves stuck in that trap, it could feel like quite a stretch to A, tune in to when they're in that space, but then B, it could feel like quite a stretch to suddenly begin saying, no, I'm capable of making good decisions, or no, my voice does matter. Like it feels like there's got to be a bridge, you know what I mean? For the belief system to go from one to the other. Sometimes for me, when I'm trying to build a bridge like that, it helps me to ask myself, what would you tell your child? Like, what would you tell one of your boys if they were in this same struggle? Because then it depersonalizes it and you can see the principle better. So what are some things that you do to help people cross that bridge?
Yeah, the baby steps. You're right, because you want it to feel true too. And in that moment, if this is a brand new skill that you're exercising, it doesn't feel true that you make good decisions. That's why you're overthinking. That's why you're pleasing. So the baby step there is, okay, let's just name what's happening. I'm doing that thing again. I'm doing it again. Okay, I'm doing it. And the subtle difference there is not, crap, I'm doing that thing again. I'm not shaming myself that this is showing up again. It's a process. It's going, I mean, you have been in this habit for a long time. It's going to take a while to rewrite that story to be different in your brain. So it's with compassion. It's just, yep, I'm doing that thing again.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit more of a neutral statement. It's just a recognition piece. And then from there, sure, we can step habits and say, let's look at how you want to talk to yourself different. But that's usually a pretty easy in.
Okay, that's really good. I like that. Okay, so go ahead and hit the third one. What was a little example of how someone might be demonstrating that third quality?
Yeah, so the limited emotional regulation, this kind of goes, it forks off. Either you recognize my emotions run me all of the time, or I feel really disconnected from my emotions. And in fact, I really try to not feel them. So those are both indicators that just there's the discomfort there and being able to navigate them. Maybe it comes from a fear of how you've seen someone else navigate emotions. Who knows? But yeah, that's typically how we're seeing it, is in the two-pronged.
Do you think that someone who grew up highly criticized when they were young are subject to falling in that space?
Absolutely. I mean, that's me. Yes, just it sends a message that, okay, maybe emotions are not okay. And so maybe if I don't feel them, then that's what keeps me safe. Or clearly they aren't important, and so I don't need them. So for sure, people will fall into that category.
Because I think honestly, like our lives kind of go through this journey where as kids, when we're little, we're taught do what you're told, right? And essentially keep mom and dad happy, right? Good behavior equals happy mom and dad. Bad behavior equals they're probably upset with me somehow. I might get disciplined, whatever. So one way or another, we learn that good behavior or the things that please the people around us keeps them happy, which keeps us happier, right?
Exactly.
But as we grow, you begin to feel it's like that wedge gets wider as you get older of the disconnect that comes from that, right? It may help us learn as we're young, but when we get older, like I found that I went through a really hard season at a former church that we were at because I didn't realize the Lord was trying to break out of me the fact that I didn't trust my decision making. And some of that was due to some challenging relationships that had been in my life after childhood, where I didn't feel like I could have a voice. I would express myself and it was gaslighted. It was turned around on me. I was manipulated. I was belittled, things like that. And so the exposure to that over years, not at the church, but in that relationship, began to deteriorate my sense of self and my sense of voice and my sense of like, am I the problem? And it, just so if you've experienced anything like that, it will cause you to second guess. And so the season that I went through at the church was the Lord, I think, awakening me to that unhealthy pattern that had grown in my soul. Because in the season, it was like, I couldn't make anybody happy. Like, no matter what I was doing, I was pissing everybody off, but I wasn't doing anything wrong per se. It's just, they weren't giving me the validation I was looking for. And so it made me feel like my life was in a tailspin. When I finally had to come to the point, I was like, you know what? My life cannot be contingent on their approval, nobody's approval. And that was such a game changer for me to step into. And I came into this confidence. I came into this kind of, I came into myself differently because now I wasn't looking for approval to settle into any thoughts or beliefs about myself. Suddenly I was like, nope, this is how I feel. This is where I'm at. sorry if you don't like it, and of course doing it graciously, but it was like a whole journey. And I feel like from the people I know and the things I've observed, I feel like we all kind of go on that journey in one way or another. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And some people do come into that confidence, like they make a shift and it feels like a total pivot. And now, okay, I can be that for myself. And for other people, myself included, that is a really long journey of realizing, can I be that for myself?
Mm.
It's again that questioning of, but it feels a lot better when someone else does that for me. It feels a lot more comfy. And learning to sit in that discomfort, learning that you can be a source of your own safety by inviting the Holy Spirit in.
Mm.
But yeah, that journey, I agree. Everyone is on it and everyone takes a different amount of time on that journey.
Okay, so hit number 4. What was number 4 again?
Yeah, perfectionism.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Perfectionism, kind of perfection equals, yeah, I'm wondering what kind of, I have to do everything myself is a pretty big indicator that I can't rely on others. But oftentimes where that's coming from is I just want people to see me as someone who doesn't really have flaws, and
Yeah.
I don't want them to see my flaws before I do, especially that would be the worst thing ever. So that's kind of perfectionism in a nutshell.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, and then the last one, how does that show up?
Yeah, codependency.
That's a big one.
Again, my gosh, yes. Recognizing how we fall into relationships with people, and either that person gives us worth or we get worth from that person. It's what
Mm.
I call codependency is connection on cocaine,
Yeah.
because it feels hyper like, oh my gosh, this is every other relationship that's not codependent doesn't feel as good. But it's not the way we were designed. We're almost putting that person in the place of God in our life. Like they give
Yeah.
me life.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's codependency, is just that I am not okay if you are not okay with me.
That makes sense. And I feel like codependency, yeah, it shows up in my journey with that really unhealthy person. I came to realize that a lot of our relationship was they were codependent. They demonstrated a lot of codependency. But then my inability to draw lines and have boundaries and say, no, you're not going to act like this was codependency on my part because
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out how to still, I don't know, orient life with them in a certain place in my soul, and so
Yeah.
it felt a little complicated, but okay, so let's take an outlook, big picture. So what impact does all of this have on our relationship to others, to ourselves, and our relationship with God? Like, why is this journey important? Because from what we just described, people can kind of see, oh gosh, this sounds like a lot of emotional work, like this is a journey, man. But the truth is there's no avoiding it. This is life. This is the journey we all go on. And if someone wants to be a healthy person and live out the fullness of who they're meant to be, this is an inevitable, inescapable part of the process. And so, what impact does this have on our relationship to the Lord?
Oh, yeah. Well, first, yeah, it has an extreme impact on all three. To quickly touch on one of those, I would say that I was a walking, talking red flag because I had some of these responses, thinking that everybody else was a walking, talking red flag. I was sure that my trauma was a relationship repellent, and it kind of was, but not because of what happened to me. It was because of the unhealthy ways that really were just learning how to cope
Yeah.
with the trauma through these symptoms. But I remember I was bouncing back and forth between two extremes, that with others, I was constantly jumping from two ends. Lisa Turker, she calls them like trust is made up of safety and connection. So after trauma, we prioritize one over the other. So we're either seeking connection with people but deprioritizing safety, or we choose safety in ourselves and in turn don't end up connecting with others. So I was bouncing back and forth from these, trying to find solid ground, which we know only Jesus is.
Yeah.
But there was this subtle, unspoken, I don't really trust him at the moment. And for the person who has believed in God for a long time, I mean, I grew up in church. I did believe in him for a long time, but I I was questioning
Mm.
my faith, and it felt like a subtle corrosion that I didn't want to look at. Like it almost went undetected. And I would say undetected because it feels wrong or bad to admit that you're struggling to trust the Lord when you have
Yeah.
grown up in certain types of churches. But the truth is that we do bring our fears and our coping behaviors into our relationship with Jesus. And because that core need of safety wasn't met on some human side, it's really hard to imagine a God that would treat us differently consistently. So learning that God wasn't temperamental, that he actually didn't care for my striving one bit, all of that. I mean, I went through an incredibly, what I call a rebellious phase with God, which for a perfectionist, rebellion is just like what normal people do.
Right.
But I was like, I'm going to just not go to prayer at church and all of these
Right.
things. But it was also letting scripture speak and wrestle, especially with the parts that I was really grappling to understand.
Mm.
So if someone is listening to this and they are struggling to trust God right now, I would just ask them, what are you struggling to believe about him? And that for me pointed directly to where I needed to focus my healing with the Lord.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you. I have a client that I worked with who, and he would tell you this. I was working with him and he was like, I'm the king of overthinking. I'm an overthinker and he was not wrong. Like he would be perfectly landed on like literally we built out the whole plan for his podcast. It was great. It was brilliant. It was beautiful. And then he texts me the next day. He's like, no, I think I'm going to go another direction because he overthought things so much. It crippled him from being able to make any decisions. And so he had a lot of frustration in different areas of his life. And then when we recently talked, I'm going to send this episode to him. So I'll be like, here you go, buddy. Thanks for being my illustration. But when we talked, he was sharing how deep down, he didn't believe that God, I don't know, I don't want to say it wrong, but basically there's a breakdown. He didn't feel like God was speaking to him. He had a hard time hearing the Lord. There's a breakdown there. And me, I feel like it's all connected, right? Because what I have found is God relates to us in truth. And that means the truth of who we are, the truth of what's happening inside of us. He relates to us in that place, the truth, not in confusion. God is not, so he doesn't even dance that dance with us, right? It's almost like he stands back while we figure it out. And then he's like, okay, should we have a conversation now? Are you ready to get in truth? And so what would you say even to him or someone like him who's like, I'm such an overthinker. I know it's a problem, but I don't know where it comes from and I don't know how to get out of it. And clearly it's affecting other things, but it's like they have blinders on their eyes and they're on a merry-go-round and they don't know how to get off.
Absolutely. Just 2 words. What happened? Like for that example in particular, what happened between yesterday and today? And usually they'll say, well, I was thinking about it and then reminding them of what they said. Okay, this is what you said yesterday. What changed? And oftentimes it's that reminder of you actually had thought this through. You brought a lot of intentionality to this. And reminding them that they have the ability to do that. And I think you can trust what happened here. Do you think you can trust what happened when you made this decision? And reminding them that, okay, wait, you are a trustworthy source for yourself. You do make good decisions, but it's less the encouragement and more the pointing back to, you felt good about this. Cling to that feeling, because how you're feeling now is not good. How you're feeling now is the spinning. So return to the feeling that when you felt grounded. How can we get back there?
That's so good. And what happened too, like where did this all start? Which I think, again, nurture, nature, it can come from anywhere.
Even with that, what happened, it's just what happened from yesterday to today, kind of walking through, oh, I think I got in my head, or helping them recognize like, what are the things that kind of take me off course with my own thoughts?
Yeah. Okay. So then let's tie in the Holy Spirit, because of course here we love to take these normal human journeys in partnership with the Holy Spirit. In Romans, it says that those who are sons of God are led by the Spirit of God. And so I feel like that's a necessary part of the journey in order to really walk into truth. So those who are listening, let's say they have identified with one or a number of the things you've described. How can they, going forward from listening to this episode, it's over, and they're like, okay, I'm going to do better. Where do they start and how do they pull the Holy Spirit in on this? Is there some practical exercises that they can do to get started?
Yeah, that's good. So the restorative remedy that connects us back into ourselves is just learning to become present with ourselves. So I've kind of three examples that I can give for how to practice this briefly, but there are things you can do right in this moment. The first one is do things slow on purpose. It's an intentional slow down that reminds you to be present with what's most important. And when you notice that hustle and that rushing and that anxious feeling creeping in, fold the laundry slow. Drive the speed limit. If you're writing in your agenda or your planner, write it slow. Slow your walking pace. It's a reminder that our bodies go at the pace that our minds are going. So we're trying to use our body as a conduit to tell our minds, slow down. But that busy, overwhelming feeling is also your cue to slow down and invite the Lord in. I usually, as soon as I notice, okay, yeah, I'm feeling so anxious and I'm doing everything fast, everything's urgent right now, I just start praying. Lord, I feel this anxiousness. It actually feels like it's consuming right now.
Yeah.
Help me settle my anxious mind. I want to spend just this next 30 seconds with you in your presence. Do you have anything you want to tell me?
Yeah.
And it's making space to not only talk to the Lord, but to listen to him. And then the second one is just, you can check in with yourself throughout the day. And people who are disconnected from themselves don't even think to check in with themselves, but your body has clues about what's going on inside. So just take a pulse. How are you feeling throughout the day? Are you thirsty? Are you agitated? Are you tired? Are you a little bit uncomfortable? What sensations are you noticing? What's happening in your mind? How about your emotions? But this can be a reflective time at the end of the day, or you can I have people that set timers throughout the day that are really trying to build awareness for themselves.
That's good.
And if you want to take this kind of from an awareness exercise and presence to a more powerful self-trust activity, you can add on the phrase to some of those, what do I need right now? And when you slow down to observe your state, your needs are going to float to the surface. And you might notice, I am thirsty, or I am really worried, and you can pause to pray about that. But self-trust comes when you are compassionate with yourself and you can take action to meet your need. And this is going to take you out of the feeling like you need to rely on others and show you that you can also be that source of safety. I want to put kind of an asterisk around needs here, because that's something that, like you were talking about buzzwords, that's something we hear a lot about right now. And if that's a place that people are getting stuck, which it often is, I want to just encourage you that it can be a trial and error process. It's 100% okay to take a guess at what you think you need. And if you're wrong and you go on a walk and you thought it would be helpful and now you're more grumpy, okay, now you know that that's not the way to meet your need with that current trigger at that time. But you did learn something about yourself regardless. And presence is supposed to be a gift to you. It's not a task that's required from you.
Yeah.
I invite the Lord into this process just by talking to him and saying, Lord, I feel the pull right now to overthink this situation and to make this person happy. And I know that you want me to value myself, but I'm feeling really nervous or avoidant or whatever. And I think I just need to go into a room and maybe change scenery and see if that helps me feel less stuck in my thoughts. But Lord, I invite you to interrupt the battle in my mind with your truth that my voice matters. But it really is this slow down, connect with yourself, do things slow, and make space for the Holy Spirit to speak.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. And actually, now that you're describing that, I realized to kind of help my youngest son, mostly because he's still young enough to cooperate with me. I kind of walk him through that. Sometimes when he gets really unregulated, really wound up, or really anxious, or starts being real emotional, or real irritated, or whatever it is, I'll stop him and I'll be like, okay, buddy, I need you to check in with yourself. What is your heart asking for? What's your heart asking for? What do you need right now? And then he'll stop and he'll be like, I just need a hug. Okay, let me give you a hug. I'm really hungry. Oh, yeah, you do tend to get emotional when you're hungry. Let's feed you.
Me too.
And so little moments like that has helped me as I learned to begin to trust my voice, asking myself, just not even, Jen, what's wrong with you? Or Jen, what do you need? What's your problem? What happened? Not over analyzing, but just simply, what is my heart asking for right now? Because your heart and your spirit are all connected to your subconscious mind and your body, and they're sending you signals. And so sometimes hunger looks like irritability, and sometimes resistance to the project you need to do actually is insecurity, or it's the fact that you're hung up on something that happened yesterday and you haven't gotten over it yet, or it can be from anywhere, but it just causes a breakdown, right? And so checking in with your heart, like what you're describing, sounds so simple and yet so valuable. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so if my listeners are like, ooh, she sounds like she just really knows what she's talking about, let's connect. Let's figure out what she's got going. How can they connect with you online?
Yeah. 3 ways you can work with me depending on where you're at in your journey, because the drapery over this conversation is kind of the theme of authenticity. So that's exactly where we go inside my free Facebook community. Nothing like having people champion you in your journey, learning together in a space where people are saying, me too. So if community is your jam, you can join me inside there. You have a link to that you'll put in the show notes. Yeah, namely what we're doing in there is that idea of building trust for yourself, others, and God.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're resonating with what I said today and you're wondering, is that me? Do I do that? I do have a free quiz you can take. It's called the Authenticity Audit. It'll just kind of give you your personal score of if you're being true to yourself and if you may have gotten buried beneath some of those 5 symptoms. And then lastly, if you were like nodding along today, already know that this is you, you're invited to join me inside my 10-week group program, Anchored into Authenticity, launching September 12th. And if you want to experience becoming grounded in that authenticity so you can feel reconnected to yourself and confident in who you want to become, then that's for you. Of course, I'm everywhere that you are. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I will put those links in the show notes. And for those of you who are like, where to start with the quiz. Start with the quiz because that'll give you direction what to do next. So that sounds so good. I love that you have a quiz. I didn't see that earlier. So I'm like, ooh, I want to go take your quiz. Excellent.
Yes.
Well, Taryn, thanks so much for sharing about this. Now, you guys don't go anywhere. Well, actually, there will be a week in between these episodes. But come back next week because Taryn and I are going to be talking about another topic that is not discussed very much. And all my men listeners, do not be offended by the name of this episode, but we're going to be talking about overcoming broken trust with men, yourself, and others. And I wanted to talk about this because a lot of women actually have a lot of trust issues with men for all sorts of various reasons. I want you guys to know we will not be demonizing men in this episode. That's not God's way, but we will be visiting this topic in a way that is meant to bring some light, freedom, truth, all the good things. So make sure you're subscribed to Java with Jen podcast, anywhere you're listening, so you don't miss next week. And thank you so much for Taryn coming on the show. You were amazing. You guys go check her out online as well. Those links are all in the show notes. We will see y'all next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at javawithjenmerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.